The assembly hall vibrated with disciplined silence. Boots perfectly aligned, uniforms immaculate, shoulders straight, everyone waited for the bell that would announce the general's entrance. The white neon light fell in a sharp beam over the immaculate rows of soldiers. Only one motionless figure at the back of the room stood out in this rigid symmetry. Before we dive into the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Elena, logistics technician, ID 31847, had been assigned to Camp Liberty for just over 2 years. At 29, she still bore on her face the soft features of a youth that had never had time to exist. Her uniform was that of the civil military specialists, plain, without decoration, without the slightest insignia of rank. She held her back straight, arms at her sides, fingers slightly tensed against the coarse fabric of her service pants. "Why aren't you saluting the general?" The voice cracked through the air, sharp, authoritative. A lieutenant with 2 stripes. Heads turned as one. In a rustle of fabric, dozens of eyes converged on her. Elena did not move. Not a muscle betrayed the effort it took to remain still. The air seemed to vibrate between them. Around her, whispers rose. "Is this a joke? She's going to get fired on the spot. What's she waiting for? Salute. For God's sake." General Mitchell had just entered, preceded by 2 colonels and an official photographer. His presence filled the space. He advanced slowly, hands clasped behind his back, inspecting his personnel like a schoolmaster reviewing his pupils. He stopped halfway, drawn by the unusual murmur. The lieutenant stiffened and stepped aside. "Is there a problem here?" asked the general, his voice deep but controlled. Silence fell at once. You could hear the hum of the projectors and, somewhere, the distant squeak of a loose fan. Elena finally raised her eyes. Her clear gaze met the general's. She did not salute. She inhaled slowly, as if bracing for a blow. Then she spoke. Words simple, precise, irrevocable. "You let my unit die, sir." The officers froze. Time seemed to contract, suspended between 2 heartbeats. Someone dropped a pen. The sound of metal hitting the floor rang strangely loud. The general blinked, unsettled. "Pardon? I don't recognize you. What unit are you talking about?" "Iron down," she replied. "Forward Post Red Show, October 15th, 2016. The name fell like a stone into a well. The officers exchanged uncertain looks. Some stiffened, others looked away. General Mitchell frowned. His aide-de-camp whispered something in his ear, but he raised a hand to silence him. "I don't recall such an operation," he said at last, his tone neutral, almost weary. "You should," Elena answered calmly. A shiver ran through the hall. The cameras, set up to record the ceremony, kept rolling, capturing every second of this moment that had turned surreal. Lieutenant Blum stepped back. No one knew how to react. The general finally straightened, his jaw clenched. "Everyone back to your positions." Ceremony dismissed. The soldiers dispersed in silence, carefully avoiding Elena's gaze. Alone, she remained at the back of the hall a few seconds longer, breathing slowly, her heart pounding under the stiff fabric of her shirt. When she turned to leave, she felt the burning stares on her back, a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and a diffuse fear. In the corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoed on the tiles. She wasn't trembling. Not yet. She knew the hardest part was just beginning. The next day, the air at Liberty seemed heavier than usual. The morning sirens blared their familiar note at 0 hour, but no one seemed truly awake. Soldiers moved through the corridors with the cautious slowness of those who know a scandal is brewing. Conversations stopped whenever Elena passed. Chairs scraped, eyes lowered, voices turned artificially neutral. She said nothing. She changed nothing in her routine. As always, she arrived before dawn at the maintenance hangar. Morning dew still beaded on the wings of the drones parked in the yard. She opened the metal door, flipped the switch, and the harsh neon light revealed her small kingdom, tidy workbench, tools aligned, boxes carefully labeled. On the wall, a clock read 1:51. The same ritual every day for 2 years. She took off her jacket, tied her hair into a ponytail, and began checking the communication modules. Nothing escaped her attention: loose connectors, frequency interference, micro cracks on the signal casings. Her concentration was total, almost mechanical. The work soothed her, anchoring her in something tangible: numbers, circuits, sounds she could control. Unlike the voices around her. Toward 0 hour, a young technician came in, visibly nervous. "Hi Elena, I need a power cable for Simulator B." She simply nodded without looking at him, took the cable from the wall, and handed it to him. "Thanks. You can plug it directly into the side panel. Avoid the port, it overheats." He hesitated, then ventured, "About what happened yesterday. You're going to get in trouble." Elena finally looked up. Her gaze was calm but so cold it cut the conversation short. "Get back to work, Lewis." He left immediately, embarrassed, closing the door behind him. Outside, the rumor was spreading. People were talking about the incident in the corridors, in the cafeteria, in the dorms. Some said she'd lost her mind, others that she was chasing fame or had a personal grudge against the general. The younger ones, fascinated, whispered that she'd survived something no one could understand. The name Iron Down began to circulate like a forbidden murmur. At noon, a disciplinary officer summoned her. She entered the office without saluting, standing straight as a post. Commander Ace, a massive man with a chiseled face, stared at her for a few seconds. "Specialist Hartman, do you know why you're here?" "Yes, sir. Your behavior yesterday was interpreted as an act of public insubordination toward a superior officer. Do you realize the seriousness of that?" "I do, sir." He paused, trying to read something in her expression. "Do you have anything to add in your defense?" "No, sir." "Very well. The report will be forwarded to command. In the meantime, you are relieved of your logistical duties for 3 days. You are to remain on base under observation. Understood?" She took a step back, turned on her heel, and left without waiting to be dismissed. Ace remained alone in his office, fingers tapping on the file. A minute later, he picked up the phone. "Colonel, it's Ace." "Yes," she confirmed her statement. "No," she showed no sign of agitation. "Yes, I know. I'll keep her under surveillance." That evening, the base sank back into its artificial calm. The hangars went dark one by one. The headlights of the jeeps swept across the empty runways. Elena walked alone, hands in her pockets, along the perimeter fence. The wind carried traces of fuel and warm dust. She stopped for a moment near the old decommissioned radar. From there, you could see the entire plane, a flat horizon devoured by the night. In the halo of the moon, she took a small metal box from the inside pocket of her jacket. Inside were 6 identification tags, polished, worn, some twisted, others half erased. She held them in her hand, making them clink softly, as if to make sure they still existed. Each sound brought back an image: faces, voices, Alvarez's laughter, Elle's stubborn silence just before the last transmission. She closed her eyes. The wind grew stronger, and for a brief moment, she thought she heard the crackle of lost radios, the distant sound of gunfire, the call of a soldier she had never been able to save. She opened her eyes again, put the box away, and resumed her steady pace back to her quarters. The room was tiny: a bed, a lamp, a metal shelf, a notebook. She placed the box in the drawer and opened the notebook. The pages were covered in tight writing, lines of radio code, circuit diagrams, and between the technical notes, a few scattered phrases. October 15th, 2016, 13:47. Last transmission received. No one came. She sat on the bed, remaining motionless for a long time. In the corridor, someone passed, then faded away. The base seemed asleep. She wasn't. At 11:40 p.m., the light in her room was still on. On her desk, the notebook lay open to a blank page. Elena took her pen and wrote slowly. "He thinks I'm crazy. Maybe. But I remember everything. And if they want to forget, I won't. Not yet." She set the pen down, closed the notebook, and blew out the lamp. Outside, the base breathed slowly in the dark. But beneath that apparent calm, something had begun to crack. Those who had seen her stay silent the day before now knew she carried a story no disciplinary sanction could suppress. And in a room of the administrative building, a young intelligence analyst quietly opened a classified database. The cursor blinked. Search, Operation Iron Down Red Echo Survivors. Carter sat alone in the archive office, eyes fixed on the screen where Elena's name appeared. Iron. The word seemed to vibrate like an echo from another time. He hesitated before clicking. The file opened slowly, line by line. Operation report dated October 17, 2016. 6 members deployed on a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. Communication lost at 13:45. Extraction cancelled by order of command. Final status, unit destroyed. Then, at the very bottom of the document, an almost erased note, 1 unconfirmed survivor. Hartman, Elena. Incoherent testimony. Severe trauma. Carter felt his heart beat faster. It wasn't a rumor. What she had said in front of everyone was true. He saved a copy of the report onto an encrypted drive and left the room without a word. In the hallway, soldiers were still talking about her. The looks were harsher than the day before, some laughed, others whispered. Silence fell as he passed, as if the very name Elena contaminated everything it touched. In the hangar, she was working alone, bent over an open radio set. The sound of tools echoed in the emptiness. Carter entered without warning. She looked up, her eyes calm but wary. You came here to ask me questions? I'm looking for the truth. Then you've taken a risk. He placed a USB drive on the table. This is what I found. A report signed by Colonel Mitchell. Iron down. She stared at it for a long time before speaking. They redirected our extraction. I survived because I was too far from the drop point. The others? No. A heavy silence followed. Only the hum of the lamps in the rain outside could be heard. Why didn't you say anything before? Asked Carter. I did. They called me crazy. Then they transferred me here. That's how they erased the voices that bother them. She closed her toolbox, wiped her hands on a rag, and added calmly, if you care about that file, hide what you found. Don't trust anyone. Carter shook his head. I won't leave you alone. You may not have a choice. When he left the hangar, the rain had turned into a storm. The wind slammed the metal doors. Elena stayed there, motionless, eyes fixed on the USB drive before her. She thought of the lost voices, the erased faces, the orders given without faces, without remorse. Later, in her quarters, she reopened her notebook. Between the lines of numbers and codes, she wrote, they forgot me, but not them. As long as a single name is read, they will not have died for nothing. Outside, the base seemed asleep. Yet, in the shadows of the buildings, a command vehicle stopped near the intelligence office. 2 figures got out, a file in hand. The lights stayed on late into the night. Carter wasn't sleeping either. He knew he had crossed a line, and that now what he had discovered could not be erased, unless they erased him too. The next morning, as Liberty seemed to breathe under tension, the sky hung low and gray, heavy with storm clouds, and the corridors buzzed with broken conversations. Something had changed in the air, an invisible caution, a fear of speaking certain words too loudly. In the command room, General Mitchell slowly leafed through a file that had just been handed to him. His tired eyes followed the lines of a preliminary report on the hall incident. It spoke of insubordination, disturbance of order, negative influence on troop morale. But between those administrative phrases, he sensed another, deeper threat. Iron down. Mitchell closed the file, looking absent. Behind him, his aide-de-camp waited in silence. You were in intelligence at the time? Asked the general. No, sir, but I heard about the operation. Officially, it never existed. Officially, Mitchell sighed. That's always the word that buries the dead. He remained standing for a long time, his gaze lost in the window. Below, the base was slowly coming to life. Jeeps passed by, soldiers formed their ranks. Everything seemed normal, but he knew that calm was only a facade. He thought of the woman he didn't remember ever meeting, and yet, her name had haunted him for 24 hours. Meanwhile, Carter worked with the caution of a hunted man. He had copied the report onto several devices, hiding them in ammunition boxes, a maintenance disc, a key tucked behind a ventilation plate. Every time he heard footsteps in the hallway, he flinched. At night, he watched the light in the general's office from the courtyard. It no longer went out before midnight. Elena, for her part, continued her routine with the same mechanical precision, up at 5 a.m., checking communication systems, inspecting drones. No sign of emotion, no complaint. But those who crossed her path felt something strange in her gaze, a cold attentiveness, a distance that made even the most talkative step back. Even her superiors avoided summoning her. One afternoon, Carter found her in the cafeteria. She was eating alone, her tray almost untouched. He sat down across from her without a word. She barely looked up. "They know you've been digging into files," she said. He swallowed hard. "I think they blocked my access this morning." "Then it's already too late to erase your tracks." She set down her fork and leaned slightly back in her chair. "You can't turn back now. What you found is their fault, not yours." "Do you want me to talk to the general?" he asked. "Not yet. He has to remember on his own. I want to see if he still has a conscience." Carter nodded. Around them, conversations had faded. A few soldiers watched from a distance, as if Elena's very presence stirred both curiosity and fear. When she stood up, everyone turned their eyes away. That evening, an internal message circulated discreetly, "Closed-door meeting." No one knew the exact reason. Some said it was a protocol reminder, others a possible disciplinary transfer. Some even claimed Elena was about to be discharged. In her room, she carefully arranged her belongings, not like someone preparing to leave, but like a woman ready to regret nothing. She took the small metal box, set it on the table, and opened the lid. The identification tags gleamed faintly under the yellow light. She took one, turned it between her fingers, and murmured a few inaudible words. Then she closed the box and slipped it into the inside pocket of her jacket. That night, a storm broke. The wind whistled between the antennas. Rain beat against the mess hall windows. Carter couldn't sleep. He stayed awake, watching the base through the window. In the main building, one light remained on, the general's office. Mitchell sat at his desk, hands clasped before him. Before him lay photographs from past campaigns, smiling faces, clean uniforms, medals, and among the open files, an old, crumpled photo. 6 soldiers stood before an armored vehicle, dusty, their faces young and tired. On the back, a nearly erased inscription, ironed down, read Cho, October 2016. He vaguely remembered that mission, the tension at the front, the decisions made too quickly. He remembered a broken radio call, a request for evacuation he hadn't answered in time. The order to redirect had come from higher command, but it was his signature at the bottom of the message. He had signed without asking questions. He placed the photo on the desk, his fingers trembling. Elena's words echoed in his head, "You let my unit die." He murmured almost to himself, "No, I only obeyed." But he knew obedience doesn't erase responsibility. When the storm ended, the base fell into heavy silence. Elena stood by her window, staring at the black sky. A light flickered across the courtyard, then disappeared. She closed the curtains and remained in the dark, back straight, eyes open. She knew the next day would change something, that the truth could no longer be buried. The following morning, the base woke under a white, windless sky, heavy with humidity. Nothing seemed to have changed, yet everyone knew the command meeting would take place that day. Faces hardened at the mention of it. In the workshops, conversations stopped abruptly at the approach of an officer. Rumors said General Mitchell wanted to put an end to the Hartman incident. Others claimed he was trying instead to verify his memories. Elena worked as if nothing existed beyond her tools. Her movements remained precise, methodical. She had learned not to tremble. The drones she maintained, the radios she repaired, all followed a silent ritual. Work, for her, was a form of breathing. Others avoided the hangar, as if her mere presence made the air colder. A sergeant entered quietly. He handed her a summons signed by the general. "Meeting at 10 o'clock, main building." She took the paper, folded it neatly, slipped it into her pocket, and continued tightening a control panel. When she finished, she cleaned her hands, put away her tools, and left without a word. In the corridor of the administrative wing, she ran into Carter. He looked nervous, eyes ringed with fatigue. "They summoned you?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, it's not your fight." "It is now. I saw what they made disappear." She stopped for a moment and looked at him silently. "Then be ready to pay the price," she said calmly, before resuming her walk. The conference room was already full, a dozen officers seated around a large metal table. The blinds were closed, and the artificial light gave the room a sickly tint. General Mitchell entered last. His face looked older, lined with exhaustion. He gestured for Elena to sit. "Specialist Hartman," he began. "I've reviewed your records and the files concerning your assignment. Your recent conduct threatens the cohesion of this base. Yet, before making any decision, I want to understand." He slid a folder of documents toward her. Inside were copies of reports and excerpts from mission logs. He pulled one out. "This report, dated October 17th, 2016, mentions your unit. You confirm that you were part of Iron Down?" "Yes, sir." "And you claim the order to cancel the extraction came from my command post?" "I don't claim it, I read it. Your signature was on the redirection order." A murmur went through the room. Mitchell stayed silent for several seconds, hands clasped. "I've signed hundreds of orders. Some came from above me. You must understand the chain of command." "I do," she replied, "but the chain always stops somewhere." Mitchell drew a slow breath. "Why bring this up now, after all these years?" "Because I saw that you've forgotten their names, and I have no right to forget in your place." She took the metal box from her pocket. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. She opened it, removed the identification tags, and laid them one by one on the table. "Captain Alvarez, Sergeant Cooper, Corporal Lee, Specialist Park, Privates Dawson and Morales. They were my team, my friends. They waited for an extraction that never came." No one spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Mitchell leaned forward and brushed the edge of Alvarez's tag with his fingers. "You kept them all this time?" "Someone had to." One of the officers, a nervous colonel, spoke up. "Sir, with all due respect, we can't reopen a closed case without authorization from the ministry." Mitchell didn't reply. He kept his eyes on Elena. "You wrote all this down in a notebook," he said finally. "I'd like to see it." She nodded, took a small yellowed notebook from her jacket, and placed it beside the tags. The pages were filled with tight handwriting, time logs, injury reports, weather conditions, coordinates, everything. Mitchell turned the pages slowly. With each one, his shoulders seemed to grow heavier. "These notes are remarkably precise," he murmured. "It was my job. I was a communications operator." He paused, closed the notebook, and looked up at her. "You believe I abandoned you on purpose?" "I believe someone did, and that you signed without reading." The sentence fell like a verdict. The general froze. Around him, no one dared breathe. Finally, he spoke in a lower voice. "I'll check the original transmissions. If what you say is true, I'll have to speak higher up." She stood. "I didn't come for me. I came for them." She turned and left. No one tried to stop her. The officers remained motionless, their eyes lost among the tags lined up on the table. Mitchell stayed seated, the notebook open before him. He understood that, for the first time in a long while, he would have to face his own past. When Elena stepped out of the room, the light in the corridor seemed too bright. She walked aimlessly for several minutes, crossing the metal galleries of the main building. Outside, the wind swept dust across the training grounds. The base seemed calm, almost normal. But deep down, she knew that every word she had just spoken would trigger a wave that would never stop. Carter was waiting near the hangar, his hands in his pockets. He could tell from her eyes that the meeting had taken place. "How did it go?" "They listened," she said simply. For the first time, they listened. And the general, he remembers, but he doesn't yet know what to do with it. She sat down on a worn-out crate. The wind lifted the pages of her files. Carter watched her, unsettled by the calm radiating from her. She showed neither anger nor fear. It was something else, an old fatigue too heavy to fade. In the general's office, the meeting continued. The remaining officers spoke in low voices. Mitchell was barely listening. He kept leafing through the notebook, unable to look away from the stained pages. Each line brought back an image, a sound, a memory. He saw again the operations room of 2016, the flickering screens, the confusion of orders. He remembered Captain Alvarez's voice on the radio. He also remembered the moment he had signed the redirection of the extraction to another sector. It had been a tactical decision, dictated by higher command, justified on paper. But now, those names written in black ink made that justification meaningless. He stood, walked to the window. The base stretched out under a low sky. Soldiers trained at the range, others moved ammunition crates. He wondered how many of them even knew half of what a miscommunicated order could mean. Behind him, his aide-de-camp waited. "Do you want me to file the case, sir?" "No. Not this time. Bring me the radio recordings from October 2016. All of them, even the scrambled segments." That evening, he received the first tapes. The sounds were distorted, covered in static. Voices overlapped, sometimes inaudible. But amid the crackling, he heard a phrase, a woman's voice, breathless, between gunfire. "Iron 12 to command, 3 dead, 2 wounded, requesting immediate evacuation." Then silence, replaced by the reply of a nervous operator. "Copy. Redirection in progress." After that, nothing. Mitchell stood motionless before the recording. He knew what it meant. Someone, that day, had decided to change the extraction coordinates. He didn't yet know who, but the signature on the order bore his name. He realized what he had always believed to be an administrative mistake was not one. It was a choice. Meanwhile, Elena worked in the dim light of her workshop. She had taken up her notebook and, for the first time in years, added a line. October 15, 1820, the order resurfaces. Then she closed the notebook, placed it on the workbench, and began dismantling a transmission unit. The steady rhythm of her hands calmed her. She knew that from now on, everything would move too quickly. Carter entered without knocking. The general asked for the archives. "They're going to check the communications. Then this is the moment, when they'll decide whether to erase or acknowledge." "You think he'll acknowledge it?" "I think he's not sleeping anymore, and that's a start." They stayed silent for a few minutes. Rain began to fall, thin, almost imperceptible. The smell of wet metal mixed with dust. Carter watched Elena's movements, precise, steady, as if every screw she tightened carried a prayer. "Do you regret not speaking sooner?" he asked. "No. Before, no one would have listened. Shame takes time to catch up to conscience." The next morning, a message circulated through the internal network. Exceptional audit of radio archives. Temporary restriction of access to command terminals. Carter immediately understood that higher command had intervened. Someone wanted to seal the lid before anything could escape. Mitchell received a coded call from the ministry. A cold, anonymous voice reminded him of procedure. Certain cases are not to be reopened. The past is a burden, not a tool. He remained silent throughout the conversation, then replied in a hard tone. "The past is mostly what we're still paying for." And he hung up. That afternoon, he left his office and walked alone to the hangar. The soldiers he passed stepped aside, surprised to see him there. Elena looked up from a control console as he entered. He stopped a few meters away. "I listened to the tapes," he said. "You were right. I know. I wasn't the only one making decisions. But you were the one who signed." He stood in silence for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Say their names out loud. Give back what silence took from them." Mitchell nodded slowly. He understood he no longer had a choice. Behind them, Carter watched the scene from the doorway. The wind rushed into the hangar, carrying with it a swirl of dust and silence. The general straightened, almost solemnly. "Very well," he said. "Prepare the main hall. It's time this base hears what it tried to forget." The next morning, the base awoke under a pale light. The soldiers were summoned urgently to the auditorium without explanation. Internal messages spoke of a command briefing. No one really knew what it was about, but everyone sensed something unusual. In the corridors, the whispers multiplied. Some said the general was going to announce a restructuring, others thought he wanted to restore discipline after the recent events. Elena arrived among the last. She sat in the back of the room, upright and motionless. Carter, meanwhile, took a seat near the control booth, from where he could watch without drawing attention. He felt a strange tension, as if the entire base were holding its breath. General Mitchell entered a few minutes later. His uniform was impeccable, in stark contrast to his tired face. He stopped at the center of the stage, placed his notes on the podium, and looked up at the assembly. The room fell silent at once. "Soldiers of Camp Liberty," he began, "what I'm about to say isn't in the protocol, but it must be said. Yesterday, I reopened a file this army had chosen to forget. An operation carried out in October 2016. Codename, Iron Down. A murmur ran through the room. A few veterans exchanged uneasy glances. Mitchell went on. At that time, a reconnaissance unit was sent behind enemy lines. An ambush destroyed all communication. A request for evacuation was received, then redirected. The order bore my signature. The unit was never rescued. He paused. The words echoed slowly through the air. Only the faint hum of the lights could be heard. 5 soldiers died. 1 survived. She is here among you, Specialist Elena Hartman. All heads turned to the back of the room. Elena didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the general. He continued, more quietly. Until yesterday, I would have said I knew nothing of this story. Today I know that isn't true. I signed without understanding, without checking, without listening. And it was that silence that killed your unit, Hartman, not the bullets, the silence. No one dared to speak. Some officers looked away. Others seemed stricken. Carter watched, barely able to breathe. He realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a public confession in a world where authority never questions itself. Mitchell took a breath, searching for his words. I've ordered the official reinstatement of the Iron Down unit in the records. A memorial will be built here on the base. This is not a political gesture, it's a debt. The least I can do. Elena stood slowly. All eyes turned toward her. She walked to the front of the room. The steps of her boots echoed on the floor like a metronome. Facing the general, she stopped, straight and steady. I didn't come for apologies, she said clearly. What I wanted was for them to be remembered, not just them, but the cost of silence for those who obey. Mitchell looked at her, unable to answer. She continued, more softly. You were a soldier. Like all of us, you know that orders aren't always truths. The decisions you made, others will make them tomorrow. That's why this story has to exist. So they know what it means, a line signed too quickly. The general nodded slowly. I understand. And I promise their names will never disappear again. She took a step back, gave a brief nod. Then you've done what you had to. A long silence followed. No one moved. Then a sergeant in the front row stood up. Without a word, he came to attention. Others followed, one by one. Soon the entire hall was standing. Not a sound, only the collective shiver of silent respect. Mitchell bowed his head slightly. He no longer needed to speak. Elena looked at the motionless assembly, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight on her chest ease a little. This moment erased nothing, but it repaired something small, something essential. When the improvised ceremony ended, she left the room without waiting. Carter joined her outside. You've won, he murmured. No. No one wins in stories like this. We just learn to carry the truth without letting it crush us. They walked together toward the hangar. The wind lifted the dust, the sky was finally opening. A timid ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds. Elena stopped, looked up at the light. Now, she said, we'll have to live with it. In the days that followed, the base slowly found its rhythm again. But nothing was quite the same. Faces seemed more attentive, greetings more sincere, conversations quieter. They had put up a large temporary panel on a wall near the administrative building, not yet engraved in metal. The motto was written in simple letters. They held the line. Soldiers sometimes stopped there in silence before resuming their march. Elena did not attend the installation of the memorial. She preferred to stay apart, in the hangar where the noise of tools drowned out the memories. Yet every morning, she passed by the wall without stopping, just a quick glance. It was enough for her to know the names were there. Carter continued working in intelligence, though now under supervision. His superior had reminded him that curiosity had limits. Despite that, he still saved copies of all documents related to Iron Down. He knew the wind could change, that today's truths could become tomorrow's secrets again. One evening, he joined Elena in the cafeteria. She was reading a technical report, seated near the window overlooking the courtyard. They've finished the wall, he said. You'll go see it, maybe? The general added another plaque, yours, for bringing back the lost voices. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I didn't bring them back. I just spoke. They stayed silent for a while. Outside, the warm wind made the flags snap. Silhouettes passed slowly between the buildings. Carter watched Elena, her rigid posture, her eyes that seemed to look farther than the base. "You're going to stay here?" "No, not for long." "You want to leave?" "It's not a matter of wanting. I did what I had to do. Now this story belongs to them." The next day, Mitchell called Carter into his office. The general looked calmer, almost changed. "You helped bring the truth to light." "That wasn't without risk, I know. I just wanted to understand, sir." "And did you?" "More than most. You'll stay assigned here. If I'm not dismissed." "You won't be, not while I command this base." Mitchell stood and walked to the window. "You know, when I was young, I was taught that loyalty meant obeying without question. Today I wonder if true loyalty isn't sometimes disobeying silence." Carter found nothing to say. The general turned toward him, his gaze softer. "Hartman is requesting a transfer. I wanted you to know." "Where will she go?" "A remote base in the north. She's asked for a technical post, far from command. I think she just wants to breathe." That afternoon, Elena packed her things. The hangar seemed larger, emptier, without its familiar noise. On the workbench, she left her tools perfectly aligned, her notebook closed, the metal box in the center. She removed her identification tags and slipped them into a brown envelope addressed to the general. Inside, a single note, "Mission accomplished." Carter entered as she was closing her locker. "It's true? You're leaving?" "Yes. It's better this way. They need you here." "No. They need memory, and that's already in place." He lowered his head, searching for words. "I would never have found out." "You would have, eventually. You have the look of someone who still doubts the world. Keep it. It's rare." They shook hands, a simple gesture, without ceremony. Then she left the hangar, her bag on her shoulder, without looking back. Carter watched her until she disappeared at the end of the path. That evening, the base grew quiet. The warm wind had risen, carrying the scent of metal and sand. The general left his office and walked to the memorial. Before the metal wall, he stood alone for a long time. His fingers brushed the engraved names. He murmured each first name softly, like a late prayer. Then he took out the envelope he had received that afternoon. Inside, the identification tags glimmered faintly. He closed the envelope and slipped it into his pocket. Straightening up, he saw Carter a few meters away, standing still. "Do you come here often?" asked the general. "When I need to." "Me too." They stood side by side, saying nothing. The wind blew gently over the wall, making the flags tremble. The night fell calm, almost peaceful. In the days that followed, no one saw Elena again. Her name disappeared from the base registry, replaced by a simple note, "Transferred." But some said that in the morning, when the sun struck the memorial wall, one could see in the steel's reflection a slender silhouette, standing still, gazing toward the horizon. Dawn rose slowly over Camp Liberty. The light slid across the hangars, brushed the windows of the dormitories, and made the memorial wall gleam. The air smelled of wet earth and dust. It was a morning like so many others, but the base seemed different, as if something invisible had lifted its weight. In the courtyard, soldiers were warming up, engines rumbled, orders were lost in the wind. Yet a particular silence lingered, the silence of a place that remembered. Elena had been gone for 3 weeks. Her departure had been discreet, almost secret. A jeep had taken her to the helipad at sunrise, no ceremony, no official farewell. The general had simply watched the scene from his office, hands clasped behind his back. Carter, too, had come from a distance, hidden near the hangar. He had seen her board without a backward glance. Then the aircraft disappeared northward, swallowed by the mist. Since then, her presence lingered everywhere, in the corridors, in the quiet of the workshops, in the new precision with which the teams worked. The technicians now double-checked transmissions. The officers read orders more slowly before signing. What she had said had left a mark no directive could erase. Carter often passed by the memorial. He would stop for a few minutes, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the engraved names. Sometimes he found flowers, sometimes a ribbon, sometimes a small flag planted in the ground. No one knew who placed them, but everyone had their own idea. They said that at dusk, a figure would appear and stand there for a long time before vanishing. No one tried to catch her. One morning, an envelope arrived by military mail. No sender's name, only the stamp of an isolated northern base. Inside, a single handwritten note. I'm well. The silence here is not the silence of lies, it's the silence of peace. Take care of the wall. E.H. Carter showed the letter to the general. Mitchell read it without a word, then carefully placed it in his drawer. That's all she wanted, he said finally. For silence to stop being a weapon. The months passed. The wall became a place of passage, almost a landmark. Recruits would stop there, read the names, sometimes lay a hand on the cold metal. They told the story of a woman who had dared to stay silent when obedience was demanded, and to speak when everyone else was silent. The veterans said that every army needed a ghost to remember what it tries to erase. General Mitchell eventually left his post. On the day of his departure, he made one last visit to the memorial. He stood motionless for a long time, then placed on the stone a medal he had carried since his first campaign. For those who obeyed conscience, he murmured before leaving. Carter returned to his work, lonelier than before. The base kept running, missions resumed, orders circulated. But for him, nothing held the same meaning. He knew now what a signature could cost, and what a voice was worth. In the silence of his office, he still kept the iron-down files locked in a box labeled simply, Truth. One night, as rain beat against the windows, he reopened that box. He reread the reports, the mission logs, the fragments of communication. Then he stopped on a recording he had never listened to before, a short tape, full of static and breath. You could barely make out a woman's voice, broken but clear. We're holding the line. If anyone hears this, tell them we held. Carter turned off the lamp, let the tape play a moment longer, then stood. He walked out into the courtyard. The rain had eased. The memorial wall shone under the spotlights, wet and alive. He approached and laid his hand on the cold metal. The wind blew softly. Somewhere, a radio crackled like a distant whisper. He closed his eyes. For a second, he thought he heard a familiar breath, the same calm, steady rhythm that had filled the long nights of work in the hangar. A breath, quiet, almost human. The next morning, the sun rose over a still base. The world went on, orders circulated, engines roared again. But in one corner of the yard, 6 small flags fluttered, carefully planted before the wall. A smaller one had been added beside them, without inscription. No one said anything. No one asked where it came from. That morning, the silence of liberty was no longer a silence of fear.